with all of us. For those of you I don't know or don't know me, my name is Jeff Mann. I'm a professor of religious studies and current chair of the department. And this presentation is entitled Becoming Anti-Tribal. I know that there's a lot of concern around the community, around our nation, with being able to come together and have candid, honest conversations. And there are those who think that we can't really do that. But I've come to see in my time here at Susquehanna that Susquehanna students and faculty and staff and administration are perfectly able to engage in polite, civil conversations around matters of great importance and great emotion. So we're not going to shy away from things that you might want to discuss today. I just ask that if we have these discussions, that we do so in a civil manner and that people are honest and respectful of one another. And I find that when I ask my students to do that, they always rise to the occasion. And we can have good, honest discussions, even across emotionally volatile issues. So, the plan. I'm not very good at telling the people the plan, so I'm trying to improve in that regard. I've even got a stopwatch here to try to keep me on schedule. So what we're going to do is be talking about tribalism, start off with a definition of tribalism, talk about its place among our early ancestors, its place in human civilization since around 1500, its various expressions, what tribalism can lead us to, and minimizing its effect on ourselves and others. My plan is to spend about 30 minutes talking and then 20 minutes of Q&A. That's not fixed. And if at any point if I'm going through this, I don't want to jump into a 5-minute sidebar, but if I wander too far from the mic or you want me to repeat something or explain something, then that's fine. So, I don't know how many of you are familiar with tribalism or the idea of tribalism or controversies around it, but we'll start off with a basic introduction. Tribalism is something that many people believe is hardwired into our DNA. And what this is it's an impulse to favor the in-group, our group, whatever group that is, that we belong to, and to be suspicious, to be untrusting, to even be violent towards outgroups. What these particular groups are can vary. They can be based on all sorts of things, whether it's a literal tribe, the way that might be used by anthropologists, or if we're talking about nation states or religions or any sort of organization. It can express itself in a lot of different ways, but we all, I think, intuitively understand this, that we generally make a move towards favoring and trusting and being more charitable to those who are in our group and looking with suspicion, looking with distrust, and this can again often lead to violence towards those who are of another group, even if there is no particular justification. I want to talk about its place among our early ancestors. So, among early human beings, really? No one? Not one? Not? Okay, thank you, Michelle, for one small guffaw. Okay, so talking about the place of tribalism among our earliest ancestors, it would make sense among early human beings and our predecessors to have this evolutionary advantage. In small communities, there's an evolutionary advantage to having this inclination or this impulse. Because if you're living in a small community, up to 140 people, and you have really scarce resources, another community moving into your territory poses a very serious threat. We don't think about it this way because for the most part, we don't think about our children starving to death. We don't think about, will I have enough clothes to keep myself from freezing to death this winter? That's not our reality. But for a long part of human history, that was people's reality. And so if you are very concerned about survival at a time when that can motivate you to take what belongs to others and is motivating them to take what belongs to you, you are going to want to be distrustful of others. If someone moves into your community, are they a spy? Are they trying to gauge what your community has so they can bring their community and attack and take what's already from you? And so it does make sense that this would help early human communities survive, because if you survive, you pass on your type of DNA. Your community's DNA gets passed on, and you can keep that threat at bay because other communities are threats. And this extends beyond early human history. If we look at our relatives, the chimps, our chimps tend to be very tribalistic as well. If you look at their behaviors, when encountering members of other communities, chimps often display aggression. If an adult chimp wanders into another community or tribe of chimps territory, they can literally be torn apart. That's the threat that's perceived by the outsider. And again, it makes sense if you're trying to protect your potential mates, your food supply for humans, clothing, from those who are going to pose a serious threat. And so the chimps do this. And this is not to say that it is hard and fast, that this is the only impulse in human nature, but this is a strong impulse in human nature. And by bringing up the chimps, I'm trying to say this goes back a very long time. This is deeply ingrained in human beings. This isn't something that developed in recent years or centuries. While it made sense for a long time in human history, today, tribalism doesn't make sense for our survival or our thriving. We're in a very different world these days. So John Ellis wrote a book about this, and for him, he uses the cutoff of 1500. You could debate that, but it's as good as any, I suppose. And he says, in most historical contexts, tribalism was a wise and prudent choice, and only the rapidly changing conditions of the last few centuries have made it feasible and sensible to depart from it. And so he looks at human history up a little closer, not our oldest human ancestors, but up through, let's say, the Middle Ages throughout the world, where you have, again, maybe you have empires, you have nations, you have larger communities, much larger than 140 people. But again, if someone shows up, they may pose a threat. Someone comes who looks very differently than you, is dressed very different than you. Are they coming from another nation, another state, another place where they want to take your territory? And it's natural to want to take other people's territory because that's how you survive. If you want your community to survive in a very dangerous world, you want to build a buffer. So you want to take more land, and you do that violently. Other people are doing the same logical thing. So again, we're just naturally going to be distrustful of others, and that helps communities survive and pass on their DNA. But since 1500, things changed a lot. We're around 1500. When we start building ships and going around the world, right? When you start sending large communities to different parts of the world, when we have advantages now like the printing press, where people can learn so much more. They can read so much more, and they can learn about other communities, so that this other community is not just some strange reference point, but they can learn, what do Muslims believe? What do Hindus believe? Right? What is this other community about? And so if you start learning about other people, that can help soften some of the effects, the impulses of tribalism. And as you have large communities that then are not so worried about, will I and my children starve to death next week? They are in the position then to start building longer term relationships with others, to be able to trade. And so the world is going to change when you can have this knowledge of what the other is, when you have enough resources that you don't have to worry so much about them taking what is yours and you dying. And so there's going to be an effect so that we reach the point where we're at now, where tribalism today, by and large, is unequivocally hurtful. It is dangerous, right? In our world, tribalism is not helpful anymore. It's dangerous. And we see this expressed in all sorts of different ways. So, as I said, we can think about it in terms of our early human ancestors in very small communities, but tribalism, this impulse within us, is not based on simply similar DNA structures or similar appearances. It can be based on nationality. And nationality does often overlap with race, but it needn't, right? There are, for those of us who remember the Cold War, right? The United States and the Soviet Union were not that different overall racially, but there was a lot of mutual distrust at that time. So we can have tribalism expressing itself very strongly in terms of nationality. We can certainly have this with religion as well. And it doesn't even need to be really big differences of religion. Very often, a lot of the violence has to do with very small differences in religion. Look at Ireland, right? They're all the Christians in Ireland, but Catholics and Protestants. And from an outsider perspective, what are really the differences? But they're willing to kill one another. I grew up as a Lutheran, and I don't know if you know your Lutherans, but among the Lutherans, there's the ELCA, the group that the Susquehanna is affiliated with, and there's another group called the Missouri Synod. One is much more liberal, one is much more conservative. They're both Lutherans, but the way that they talk about each other still today. Yeah. So tribalism, it can express itself that way. Race, of course, is another place that we see tribalism playing itself out. There are people who would argue, there are people who argue that racism is baked into our DNA. I disagree. I think tribalism is baked in our DNA, and racism is one way that it can express itself. We have tribalism with regard to race, and that can easily lead to the belief that that other race is dangerous, is inferior, is subhuman, or a bunch of cockroaches, right? Whatever it is. And so this can then lead to racism. So racism shouldn't be surprising. But I think that it's an expression of tribalism, one particular. The tribalism can be linguistic. It can be regard to wealth, right? So that tribe, the 1%, the people on the other side of the tracks, right? That we can feel this way about, my tribe and then those other people. And it can go either way. We can disparage the wealthy and regard them as an evil group, and people do it with the poor as well. It can work either way. Culture and ethnicity, not surprising, works the same way. Even school district, right? So I don't know if any of you were involved in high school sports and how strongly you feel about those people from Shikellamy, if you're a local, right? So, we feel a lot of passion towards that. Now, some of these rise to a very dangerous level and some less so. What football team you support? And that can be either American football or how the rest of the world talks about football. But you know about how passionate people can get. And it's fine to belong to a tribe, right? There's nothing, we're in tribes. We're necessarily in tribes. But tribalism is taking that to a different degree. And so, at football games in Europe, right? Look at how violent people can get over there. And they are so passionate about me versus them. Level of education, and again, that can work either way. You can have people looking down on those simple-minded folks who never went to college, and then you can look at those snooty professors and how unhelpful that tribe is. Academic department, I don't know about the students if they feel that sort of tension between different majors and such. Among the faculty, yeah, it can express itself in various ways, right? The humanities and the sciences, there's some tribalism that's definitely going on between those groups, let alone the business school, right? So that can express itself that way. Sexual orientation, certainly. And what I think all of us recognize, which is politics. And I don't know if you would agree, but I would argue that where we are seeing the most harmful tribalism right now, and not just this week, but in recent years, maybe recent decades, has to do with tribalism with regard to politics. The way that we look at people, and I know we have people here from the left and the right, but the way that we have this tendency, this impulse, this drive to look at those other people who we give a name to, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, or less charitable names that might be extended to either one. And we are just intuitively distrustful of them. We know that they're not as smart, because if they were as smart as I was, they would see that my position is right. And we know that they're not as good a people as my side, because if they were as good a people, they would care about the things that I care about and am advocating for. We see this expressing itself constantly in our society. And what's interesting to me is all of us agree. If you ask around campus, you ask around the community, are we tribalist with regard to politics, or however you want to phrase it? And people are like, yeah, things are really bad. And then we continue to contribute to it. We've got this impulse within us, and politics is, I think, where we're seeing it express itself a lot. And that might be where we want to spend more of our conversation, but I'll see where you might want to take that later. So what do? When in doubt, consult the Buddhists. That's my best advice. And so if those of you know your Buddhism, and specifically you'll recognize the Eightfold Path. If not, I got a book you can read. But in Buddhism, right, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the Eightfold Path. And so I thought maybe we can use this as a model to discuss how we can respond to our own tribalist inclinations. So we could start at the top with right view. I think first we have to understand this. And if you've all been paying attention, then you do, right? To understand what tribalism is, why we have this impulse, where it comes from, how it expresses itself. We have to intellectually understand this, first of all, because that moves us in a helpful direction. Right intention. You have to want to do something about it. If we all say, yeah, it kind of sucks, but whatever, we have to want to improve ourselves. If there's no intention to actually do the work to improve yourself, to be a better human being, then again, things fall apart. There needs to be that intention. Right speech. I thought about this one for a little while. And I thought, there's a lot of ways in which this, our speech, is what's contributing to an awful lot of tribalism. Right speech with regard to the Buddhists has to do a lot of times with lying, and you should be honest. And so there's a great emphasis on honesty among Buddhists, which I always say is a good reason. If you get a new haircut and you actually want to know what it looks like, find a Buddhist, right? Because everyone else is just going to tell you it looks great, whatever it looks like. So lying is a problematic thing. But if you look at our conversations around political difference, it's fine to have them. It's fine. It's important to have discussions around political issues, political difference, to post what you think on social media. But are you lying? Well, we're probably not lying. Are we exaggerating? Are we telling half-truths? All the time, right? The things that we leave out, the things that we take out of context, the things that we exaggerate a little bit for effect. And what does that do? When we're talking politics and we describe the other group and we exaggerate, we tell a half-truth, what does that do? Well, if you're on my side, it just confirms what you knew about those people, that they're stupid and bad. And if you're on the other side and you hear yourself described that way, what does that do? You're like, am I allowed to say sons of bitches? Those sons of bitches are describing us in a completely unfair way. Right? Look, that is not what we believe. You have created a straw man. That is unfair to treat us that way and to perpetuate that untruth about us. And so when you tell half-truths or exaggerate, when we do this, I'm not going to claim that I always get this right by any means, but when we do this, we add arrogance to our own group and resentment to the perspective of others. We've been facing a lot of issues recently, and I hope that what you do is when you see a claim made about someone on your side or the other side of the political divide, and it looks noteworthy, I hope you check to see if it's even true before you pass it on or make an argument based on it. And it's so easy now. With AI, you just go to the chat bot, right? Or whatever it's called, and you ask, did this person say such and such? What was the context? Boom. Takes no time at all. And it's saddening to me to see, and I'm not talking about anyone here in this room, academics. The person I'm thinking of doesn't even work here, just for the record. But academics who should know better, who know the importance of these sorts of things, perpetuating half-truths. When I think you could have just looked it up before you passed that on. And this is not a right thing, it's not a left thing, this is an us thing. Okay. Right action. Right action. I think what we have to remember is that we are always representing our tribe. Walking down the street, picking up a piece of trash, right? Glaring at someone, whatever it is, we are always representing our tribe. People are watching us and reaching conclusions about what members of our tribe. And again, it doesn't have to be politics, it's all sorts of things. Are you giving people an excuse to think worse of you? So my wife, as many of you know my wife, and my wife is from the Philippines, and I remember her making the comment that she saw some Filipinos leave a bunch of trash on like the floor at at the mall or something like that. And she got really mad. And she went over and she picked it up and put it away. Now, do people do that? Yeah. Do all people do that of all different races and national backgrounds? Yeah, probably. But what she recognizes, people will see that. And in this area, there aren't many Asians, there aren't many Filipinos. And anyone who already has an inclination to, look suspiciously at that group is going to have it confirmed. We always represent our tribe. And if you want others to think well of your tribe, and to treat you with respect, then we have to be mindful of that. We contribute to more tribalism when we act like jerks. Okay, right livelihood. I couldn't come up with one, sorry. Okay, we'll skip that. Right effort. So I thought with regard to this, some of you know that early man used a different method to remember people's names and addresses and phone numbers. It was called a Rolodex. And I have a picture of it there. And so before you did this all electronically, what you would do is you'd have a physical card and you would write with a pen people's names, address, phone number. There was no email. Okay. And you would put it in, well, that thing. Right. And it would spin around and they'd be alphabetical. So when you needed to find out something like I need to call Chris Markle, right? So you'd flip to M and it would be there and it would be Chris Markle, his phone number, and then it would be like 5 kids. So you'd remember to ask, hey, how are your 5 kids when you talk to them? And so we'd have this Rolodex, right? And it was a list of our contacts, the people in our lives, professionally, socially, whatever it might be. And so I used this image once in a presentation, and afterwards Louis Land is like, dude, students don't know what a Rolodex is. And I thought, oh, okay. Anyway, I like the image because what I've realized in myself is there are times that I look at a person and based on identity markers of some sort, whatever it is, their clothes, they're too big, they're too small, they're too tall or short, the music they're listening to, whatever. And I find myself, because of that identity marker, thinking like, I know what group they're in. I don't like those people, right? And I'm not a horrible person, in case you were wondering, but we all have this inclination, right? There are times you're like, oh, look at that t-shirt. I know what kind of person that is. Look at that hat. Okay. And so then what I started doing is I thought, okay. When I catch myself doing this, I scroll through my mental Rolodex and I think of someone else that I know who's also in that tribe, who I like. And then I think, okay, that person is, I'm trying to think of an example. What's a band I don't like? Sworna, what's a band I don't like? Okay. Creed. No, I actually like that song that did the Arms Wide Open. Like that's a beautiful song. Okay. Anyway, so I see this person with a I'll just go with Billy Joel. I'm fine with him, but I see someone in a Billy Joel shirt and I'm like, oh, Billy Joel. I hate that guy and I hate those people who like Billy Joel. And then I do this trick with my mental Rolodex and I think, you know who likes Billy Joel? Also likes Billy Joel is Swarna Basu. And I'm like, I still don't get it, but Swarna's a decent guy. And if Swarna is a decent guy and can like Billy Joel, then maybe this person also, right? And so I just do this as a mental check and I imagine, okay, that person could also be like so-and-so. This works better the more people you know. When you get to be my age, you get a bigger Rolodex. You've known more people and that can be helpful. So one thing that does facilitate, make this whole model work better is know more people, get to know lots of people. But that's a way that I think of as maybe right effort, a way that I do that. How am I doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. Okay. At least in terms of time, you can gauge the presentation later. Right concentration. This one made me think of Martin Luther. Lots of things make me think of Martin Luther. In this case, Martin Luther talks about God's law as a mirror. That when you have God's law, the things that you are to do to be a good, righteous person, right? That's like a mirror. And you should look at yourself in that mirror. That's the purpose of the law, the primary purpose of the law, Luther says. And that's the reason you have a mirror. The purpose of a mirror is to look at yourself. And so Luther says that you need to, look at yourself. And so if thinking about, these issues that we're discussing, thinking about tribalism, intent, speech, action, are you using this as a way to look at yourself? Or are you angling the mirror so you can look at those other people? We have a tendency to listen. This is all of us, right? To be like tribalism, bad. Yeah. You know who does that? Those people over there, right? In that other tribe, right? But we have to to have the concentration, the extended concentration to ask ourselves, is this me? In what way am I doing this? To spend time in this introspection, because all of us have this hardwired in our DNA. We all have this tendency. And so you can't spend your time talking about how those other people are tribalist. Look in the mirror at yourself. That's why we have mirrors. But that's a hard thing to do. And it requires extended work. There was one time that I was complaining about people canceling speakers, as I do sometimes. And then I thought back, and it occurred to me, I had thought about it a long time. When I was 23 years old, 23 years old, there was a speaker who had been brought to Trenton State University, which is near where I was working at that time. And I did not like this person, and a lot of people did not like this person. They had good reason not to like this person. And I went to be part of a protest against this guy speaking. And then I thought, oh crap, am I a hypocrite? And it took me time to think about it and to be honest with myself. Am I being a hypocrite? And I had to work through, well, what are the similarities? What are the differences? And it made me think in a more detailed way. I'm not going to tell you how I resolved it. We can talk later. But it was an example where I had to actually, seriously engage this and ask the question about myself. And that might, I suppose, extend to right mindfulness as well. Like, are you making an effort to do this, if not constantly, on a regular basis? Is this part of what you remember to do with yourself? And not just something you think about once in a while. Okay. What does that say? Okay. One other thing I wanted to present before we have a conversation. There are criticisms of what I've presented about tribalism. Not everyone agrees with this. I think most people, or I think what I presented is a pretty dominant view in the field. That does not mean it's right or wrong. But at least it's not just me. But there are serious criticisms of this discussion of tribalism. And so if you start looking at this, or if you do disagree, right, there are other people who share that view. Some of the concern is about the word itself, tribalism, and that this brings to mind tribes and what we think of as tribes or primitive. And I understand that objection. Until a better word is brought about, until we have a different word or a better word to consider, I'm not going to switch to something else, but we need to be mindful that tribes is meant very broadly here. And so that's worth bringing up. The other pushback has been to say, and I think this is fair to a degree, that people talking about tribalism like I have sometimes pushed too far and suggested this is the dominant impulse in human beings to the neglect of other impulses. If you were to go that far, yeah, I think that would be worthy of criticism. I try to have that balance, and I want to talk about other impulses. But you should be aware that there are disagreements. If you want an article, I was just reading a good article that's critical of my position, and I'd be happy to share it with you at some other point. Send me an email. I'll pass it on to you. But I don't want to suggest this is the only or the dominant impulse in human beings, although it's a very strong one. There are fortunately other impulses that we have. We have impulses towards empathy. We have impulses to believe in a concept of justice. We have an impulse that leads us to appreciate kindness and to encourage kindness. So we have these different impulses within us, right? There are things pushing back on our tribalist nature. And so, like the whole image of the two wolves, do you people know the story? Do you nice folks know the story of the two wolves? Right? There's a story where there's a Native American boy and his grandpa, and the grandpa is telling him that we all have two wolves within us. One is fighting for what is right, and one is fighting for what is harmful. And the boy asks, well, which wolf is going to win? And the grandpa says, the one that you feed. I was like, that's a good one. So we do have these multiple impulses within us. We have a tribalist impulse. Are you going to feed it? Are you going to try to discourage it in yourself, call it out in others? And are you going to cultivate the positive impulses that can lead us to make the world a better place rather than tearing us apart and tearing us down? I have a question that I'm going to pop up here, and maybe we can start with it if you would like. And if you want to take this in other directions, if you want to, raise a question, answer this question, challenge me on anything that I've said, then that's fine. The question that I have is, I don't know how I made that appear like that. What have we done well, and what could we do better? The condition is you can't answer the second part unless you answer the first part. You got to give an example of something going well. If you just have something that we're doing well, that's fine. But you can't criticize unless first you have something positive to say. Drew, you want to get us started? Yeah, I know. I did that on purpose. I'm not sure. When I first wrote the question, I had it as SU, and then I thought, I don't want to say what is SU because then that means what is, well, from our perspective, the administration, right? And from the student's perspective, the faculty, right? So I'll leave it up to you if you want to deal with it broadly in terms of what we as a nation maybe have done. Is there something positive that we as a nation have done? I would love to hear some good news. But if it's local, then that's fine too. Good question. So what do you think? Please.
Say, or we've done well. Well, if you think about where we've come from, in a very, very, very short period of time, we've gone from having a really short life expectancy, dying of just about everything that possibly kill us, to eliminating all of that. We've provided well-being, food, security for most of our species. And we've learned how to live together much better than we were doing a couple of thousand years ago. Mm-hmm. What could we do better? Well, the trend lines I think are mostly positive. We just keep on going to the positive direction we've been going. Mm-hmm. I want those of you.
You've been reading Steven Pinker. Are you familiar with him? Yeah. Yeah, I think that we do lose sight of exactly what you're talking about. If Ellis talks about the last 500 years. It is unbelievable what we've achieved in 500 years. Technology, nutrition, education, medicine. It's unbelievable the progress. And you're right. We lose sight of that very quickly. Thank you, Drew.
Our students, all faculty adapted to online teaching in just weeks of time. And we pivoted from being able to teach in our expected ways to teaching under the COVID circumstances. Really, when COVID hit in 2021, in the fall, we quickly canceled classes, pivoted to online classes. We were so flexible and so proactive in approaching that. Right.
Yeah. Thank you. If you don't want to engage this question, this was just a suggestion. If you have any questions, about the topic, questions for me or positions that you'd like to make or arguments you'd like to make. Yes.
Hey, another impulse we have, and then what we've done well is we've learned modifies which has created why that through the trials they have had should be really focused on tribalism as a way of making money. Mm-hmm. And that it's technology and marketing make money. And created a lot of dynamic that fan plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And social media is the perfect example, right? Because if you want to make money on social media, you want to make your career, it's not about getting the largest audience, a broad spectrum. It's about getting as many from one side, and you do that by throwing out red meat. Oh. Yeah, the right livelihood. Haha, now I got a connection. All right, so yeah, if your way of making money is to exacerbate the tensions that exist in all right, so now I got to next time I got something to say. Yeah. I hope so. I, I, I really do feel that the more people who model good behavior, um, the more you use your word, it can be contagious, right? If you have people that you respect who model good behavior, I think that that can be a helpful thing. There's so many contrary forces, right? And to get back to your point, the people who become the most visible, that we hear the most about, that we get the most excited about, are the ones either for seeking hits or money, right? Are humility doesn't get you views. And I've had this conversation with my wife about things, and I try to contribute in thoughtful ways. I got opinions and I'll express them, but I try to do that in the right way. But I was actually thinking about that yesterday. That there have been people in my life who were exemplary people. So, here I don't even not heroes, but people I really respected, and I thought that person's living their life right. And there have been situations in my life where I wanted to respond in a certain way, and I asked myself, what would that person do? Right? It's a rip off of the WWJD thing, I know, but we'll leave Jesus out of this. No disrespect to Jesus. But I thought about like people who can have experiences and context closer to mine than thinking about how, Jesus would deal with people at a fast food restaurant. And I thought that person who I really respect wouldn't act this way. Maybe I shouldn't. And so, I think if we have heroes or people that we really admire, whether they're famous historical people or your grandma, right? These people, and you can ask yourself, all right, I'm in this situation and I want to do such and such. What would that person do? And I think that can contribute, right? If you have models of people who are humble, who are gracious, who are kind, I think that is in, and we could put that up there as again, a type of right work or right effort if you take the time to think about that. But, so I guess the answer is I really hope so. And maybe if we all do a little bit more, it's better than a little bit less. Anyone think I'm wrong on anything? If you don't know me, I'm fine with that. I don't get upset. If you call me a fascist, I'll just ask you to explain why. So, yep.
Do you think there's a way to call out the tribalism in a way that is more tribalistic?
Yeah. So I found myself when I was putting this together, first focusing on it, like, how do you combat tribalism out there? Like with all you people, right? And I wanted to shift it more, so I'm not a complete hypocrite along the Martin Luther thing to talk about myself. So how do you deal with tribalism in others? If you want I'll throw out my opinion, then you see where this goes, right? But first of all, I think you have to be good about calling out your own side. That goes a lot further and doesn't happen much, right? We don't want to do that. And that gets back to I think, if you know a sociologist, there's one in the corner, you can ask him if this is true. But I think there's a very strong drive against wanting to be a traitor and how we treat traitors. Traitors are far worse than enemies. And so if you turn on your own, that's not something we easily do. But if you recognize tribalism in your own tribe, and be like, okay, guys, the other group is not that bad. I disagree with this, and I think they may have gone too far, but you're overstating it. That's not true. You took that out of context. The more all of us call out our own tribe, that's how you can make, I think, a significant difference outside of ourselves, like in the conduct of others. Because if you're in a different tribe and you act inappropriately, and I'm like, you're acting inappropriately and tribalist, you're going to be like, what does he know? And you're going to push back and it won't be as effective. So we have to call out our own tribe. The other thing is, I think we got to be better at bringing together people from different tribes and getting them to know each other as people. It's not difference that divides us. It's the inability to see each other fully as human beings, right? And so that's enhanced the more we get to know each other. And the more people that you get to know, the more people you put in your Rolodex, right? And you see the humanity in those people. I think that, I don't know if you would agree, but the Western world made very, very quick advances, maybe probably the world in general, with regard to being much more kind towards homosexuals than through most of human history. Like if you look at it through our human history, right, over thousands of years, the shift was really fast. And I thought, well, why did that happen so fast? And I think some of it was that there were TV shows like Will and Grace, which featured well, two gay guys and some other people, right? And it was a very successful show, and people saw these as just regular people. And the more people got to know homosexuals, and more homosexuals were comfortable coming out of the closet, so you got to know people or realize that that person that you knew, and so people just began to see, oh, they began to see the humanity of this group rather than, that's my neighbor, that's my aunt, that's the person that, I sat next to in math class last year. And as people saw more of the humanity in them instead of the gays, right? The group over there that I saw marching in New York City, that sort of thing. I think that we have to be better at that. And since there's so many ways that we can be tribal, how do you bring different people together to help see their humanity? We did something years ago at SU. I'm sorry if I'm talking a little too much, but I'll just make this comment quickly. There's something we did years ago at SU that I think had the right spirit, but needed a tweak. Some of you may remember in the cafeteria one day, they put up little signs on all the tables where you could gather together around some common interest. So, they'd have like rugby. Well, no, that's a club. Billy Joel fans, right? So they'd have a Billy Joel's fans table, and then they'd have, other tables around different things like love the UFC, right? And all sorts of different groups that people would be like, yeah, that's me. And so the idea was that you'd sit down and you'd find someone that you had something in common with, something to connect over, who might be the sort of person you'd never interact with, whose politics, whose religion, whose national background, whatever, is completely different. I thought that was a good idea. The tweak is it ended up being a little too narrow, like chocolate. Like, and how are we going to talk about that, right? And so I thought if you could figure out a way to do that sort of thing where you bring people together across difference, give them something in common, even better. Or if it's like what you're doing with the faculty, Pat, right? Just bring people who normally don't interact together to interact together. But if you can do it around a common interest, then you start that conversation and the appreciation for the other. That was a long answer to your question. I'll just one last thought, and I think we have to identify where we're being divisive and curtail that as an institution, as a community. So, okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate you being here and your thoughts. And so if you have anything you want to send me or talk to me about afterwards, great. And hope to see you around campus soon.